The final gambit. Commander Valera Thex stood motionless before the tactical display, her six-fingered hands gripping the edge of the console until her knuckles paled to a sickly blue. The holographic projection showed what remained of the Arcadian defense fleet, mere fragments scattered across their home system, blinking feebly against the overwhelming red mass of the Coraxian Armada. "Status report," she demanded, though she already knew the answer. Chief Tactician Neros cleared his throat, the secondary gill slits at his neck fluttering with anxiety. "The Coraxian forces have breached our outer defensive lines. Colonies on Arcadia IV and V have fallen silent. We've lost contact with 80% of our battle groups. Remaining forces are regrouping at Sanctuary Station." But he hesitated. Projections indicate total system collapse within 26 hours. The command center fell silent. The Arcadian Confederation, once spanning 12 star systems with a civilization dating back millennia, now faced extinction. The Coraxians had appeared 3 standard cycles ago, their massive high ships emerging from unknown space. They consumed everything in their path: resources, technology, and life itself. Diplomacy had failed. Conventional warfare had failed. Advanced technology had failed. Now they stood at the precipice, with nothing left to lose. Valera straightened her spine, her crest rising with determination. "There's one option we haven't tried." The room turned to her, a mixture of desperation and curiosity on every face. "Archives Officer Leth, Access Restricted File Omega 791. Authorization Thex Prime Vector." Leth's eyes widened. "Commander, that file is sealed under the ancestral protocols." "Just do it," Valera snapped. The holoscreen shifted, ancient data streaming into view, records dating back to the early expansion era, before the Arcadian Confederation had even formed, before the Treaty of Seven Suns, before the Great Silence. "Is that?" Neros leaned forward, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his fear. "Yes," Valera confirmed. "Coordinates for Earth, and the emergency contact protocol for humanity." A wave of murmurs swept through the command center. Humanity was almost mythical to most species in the known galaxy. They had been formidable once, centuries ago, a rapidly expanding, unpredictable species that had startled the galactic community with their adaptability and tenacity. Then, without explanation, they had withdrawn completely, closed their borders, ceased all communication. The few who tried to breach their territory never returned. Science Officer Trila approached the display, her analytical mind already processing the possibilities. "Commander, these protocols are over 300 years old. We have no confirmation that humans even still exist, let alone that they would respond to a distress call." "What choice do we have?" Valera countered. "The Coraxians will reach Arcadia Prime in less than a day. Our people face extinction." "But the old stories about humans," Weapons Master Korov interjected, his voice lowered. "They're unsettling, unpredictable, dangerous, more dangerous than certain annihilation." Valera challenged. No one had an answer for that. Valera studied the ancient protocol. It was surprisingly simple: a specific frequency, a mathematical sequence that would identify them as sentient, and coordinates for their location. Then a message, limited to 100 characters in the old Earth standard. "Prepare the transmission," she ordered. "Direct all remaining power from secondary systems if needed. I want this signal at maximum strength." As her crew scrambled to comply, Valera composed the message carefully. What could she possibly say that would convince a long-isolated species to intervene in a war that wasn't theirs? How could she convey the desperation of her people in such limited space? In the end, simplicity won out. "Emergency protocol activated. Arcadian Confederation faces extinction. Coraxian hive consuming all. Need immediate assistance." With a deep breath, she authorized the transmission. The signal burst outward, directed toward an unremarkable yellow star in an arm of the galaxy that few had visited in centuries. "Now we wait," she said, though hope felt like a luxury they could no longer afford. Hours passed with no response. The Coraxian fleet continued its advance, methodically destroying everything in its path. Evacuation ships were being prepared, though everyone knew there was nowhere to run that the Coraxians wouldn't eventually reach. "Commander," Communications Officer Dren called out suddenly, his voice trembling. "We're receiving a response on the emergency frequency." The command center froze. Valera felt her heart skip a beat. "On screen," she ordered. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "Understood. Coordinates WARI-CEIVD. Hold position. Assistance incoming. ETA 4 HOURs. Admiral CG in. Terran Defense EFLET." 4 hours. Narrows exclaimed. "That's impossible, even with the most advanced FTL drives. The nearest star system is at least 20 hours away, and Earth is. Apparently, we don't know everything about human capabilities," Valera interrupted. For the first time in weeks, she felt something dangerously close to hope. She addressed her officers. "Prepare the fleet. All remaining ships to defensive positions around Arcadia Prime. Evacuate as many civilians as possible to the deep shelters. And," she hesitated, "prepare a formal reception protocol. We're about to make history, or witness our final hours." As the Arcadian forces scrambled into position, Science Officer Trila approached Valera privately. "Commander, there's something you should know about the old records on humans," she said quietly. "Before they isolated themselves, there was an incident, the Proxima Centauri conflict, when the Vorax attempted to colonize a human outpost world." Valera frowned. "I'm not familiar with it." "Few are. Most records were classified or destroyed. But according to what remains, the humans didn't just defeat the Vorax fleet. They obliterated it. And then they tracked the Vorax back to their homeworld. And," she swallowed hard, "they didn't demand surrender or reparations. They simply informed the Vorax leadership that if they ever threatened a human world again, humanity would ensure that the Vorax species ceased to exist. The implications hung in the air between them." "You're worried we're inviting something worse than the Coraxians?" Valera asked. Trilla shook her head. "I'm simply suggesting that if humans do come, we shouldn't expect them to follow conventional warfare protocols. They don't think like we do." Before Valera could respond, alarms blared across the command center. "Coraxian Vanguard has entered the inner system," Narrows shouted. 64 capital ships, approaching at maximum velocity. Valera straightened her uniform. "Battle stations. All ships, defensive formation Delta. We need to hold them for 4 hours. Whatever it takes." The next 3 hours were a desperate struggle. The remaining Arcadian fleet fought with the courage of the doomed, but they were hopelessly outmatched. One by one, their ships were destroyed or disabled. The Coraxian Armada pressed forward, inexorable as a force of nature. Valera watched as another frigate disappeared from the tactical display. At their current rate of losses, they wouldn't last another hour. "Commander," Dren shouted suddenly. "Massive energy signature detected at the edge of the system. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." The tactical display shifted, showing an enormous distortion forming at the system's edge, far beyond any designated jump point. The distortion grew, pulsing with energy readings that made the sensors fluctuate wildly. Then, with a flash that temporarily overloaded their sensors, a vessel emerged, then another, and another. When the sensors recovered, Valera stared in disbelief. 7 vessels had appeared, but they were unlike any ship she had ever seen. Their design was sleek, almost predatory, with no visible weapons yet somehow radiating menace. They were massive, each one dwarfing the largest Arcadian cruiser, and they moved with a precision that seemed impossible for vessels of their size. The humans, Naros whispered, his voice filled with awe and terror. As they watched, the human ships accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible in system, forming a perfect arrowhead formation as they headed directly toward the Coraxian fleet. The command center's main communication channel activated, and a face appeared on screen. A human face, weathered and stern, with eyes that seemed to evaluate and calculate with cold efficiency. "This is Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your distress call. Hold your position and stand by for further instructions." Before Valara could respond, the transmission cut off. The human fleet continued its advance toward the Coraxians, who had now halted their attack on the Arcadians and were regrouping to face this new threat. "They're going to engage the entire Coraxian fleet directly," Trela said incredulously. "Even with their technology, they're outnumbered 9-1. Valara watched the tactical display, pulse racing. Let's hope the old stories about humans are true after all. The reckoning. The silence in the Arcadian command center was absolute as all eyes fixed on the tactical display. The 7 human vessels, now identified as the Terran Defense Fleet, had ceased their advance approximately 30,000 kilometers from the Coraxian armada. They hung in space, motionless, apparently making no defensive preparations despite the overwhelming enemy force. "What are they doing?" Naros whispered. "The Coraxians are moving into attack formation." True enough, the Coraxian high ships were spreading out, surrounding the human vessels in a classic encirclement pattern. It was the same strategy they had used to devastating effect against the Arcadian fleet earlier. "Perhaps they're attempting communication," Trela suggested, though she sounded doubtful. "No," Valara replied, studying the display intently. "They're waiting for something." As if in response to her words, new energy signatures bloomed across the tactical display. Hundreds of them, small but intense, appearing seemingly from nowhere throughout the Coraxian formation. "What in the 7 moons?" Weapons Master Korov leaned forward, adjusting the sensors. "These readings can't be correct." The signatures just appeared. No jump distortion, no launch trajectories. The mysterious signatures began to move, swarming through the Coraxian fleet like insects. One by one, Coraxian ships began to register internal explosions, power fluctuations, and system failures. "Magnify," Valara ordered. The display zoomed in on one of the energy signatures. It was a small craft, barely larger than a fighter, with an unusual configuration unlike anything in Arcadian databases. As they watched, the craft attached itself to a Coraxian cruiser, seemingly melting through the hull without resistance. "Their boarding craft," Korov realized, voice thick with disbelief. "The humans are launching a direct assault onto the Coraxian ships." "That's suicide," Naros objected. "The Coraxians outnumber them thousands to 1 inside those ships, and their biology makes them lethal in close quarters." Before anyone could respond, the communication channel activated again. Admiral Chen's face appeared, as impassive as before. "Commander Thex, this is Admiral Chen. We've deployed our Phantom teams aboard the Coraxian vessels. Stand by to assist survivors if required." "Survivors?" Valara repeated, confused. "Admiral, with respect, boarding the Coraxian ships is a tactical necessity," Chen interrupted. "The Coraxians adapt quickly to conventional weapons. Direct intervention is more efficient. Please stand by." The transmission cut off again, leaving the Arcadians to watch in stunned silence as the battle, if it could be called that, unfolded. Within minutes, the first Coraxian high ship went dark, all power signatures abruptly extinguished. Then another, and another. The smaller vessels began to drift, their synchronized movements becoming erratic as command signals from the high ships ceased. "This is impossible," Trela murmured, checking and rechecking the sensor data. "The humans are systematically disabling the entire fleet from the inside." "How many personnel did they deploy?" Valara asked Korov. He studied the readings. "Based on the size of the boarding craft, Perhaps 700 total. 700 against an armada of millions, Nero said, shaking his head in wonder. The stories didn't do them justice. Within 2 hours, the mighty Corexian fleet, the same fleet that had devastated a dozen star systems and brought the Arcadian Confederation to its knees, was reduced to drifting hulks. Not a single human vessel had been damaged in the encounter. The communication channel opened once more. This time, Admiral Chen's expression had softened slightly. The Corexian threat has been neutralized. We'll remain in your system to ensure no reinforcements arrive. We would like to send a delegation to discuss next steps. Valera found her voice. Of course, Admiral. We would be honored. But how did you do this? Our best weapons barely scratched their hulls. Chen's lips curved in what might have been a smile. The Corexians rely on overwhelming biological superiority and neural-linked technology. Our Phantom teams deployed a tailored bioelectronic countermeasure that disrupted their hive connections. Without the neural network, they're unable to function cohesively. The explanation was delivered so matter-of-factly that it took Valera a moment to grasp the implications. The humans hadn't just defeated the Corexians. They had studied them, understood them, and developed a precise countermeasure that targeted their fundamental weaknesses. Admiral, she said carefully, the Corexians have been expanding for 3 years. They've destroyed dozens of worlds. How did you develop a countermeasure so quickly? Chen's expression grew serious again. We've been monitoring the Corexian expansion since they first appeared. This isn't the first hive species to threaten galactic stability, Commander. Merely the most recent. The command center fell silent as the implications of his statement sank in. You've been watching. Trila realized. All these centuries that humanity has been isolated, you've been watching the galaxy. Observing, Chen corrected. Learning. Preparing. But why isolate yourselves? Valera asked. The galaxy believed humanity had abandoned interstellar affairs. Chen was quiet for a moment. 300 years ago, humanity was involved in a devastating conflict. The last war, we call it now. It made us reconsider our place in the galactic community. We realized that our approach to diplomacy, to expansion, to conflict, it was fundamentally incompatible with most spacefaring species. Our direct intervention often caused more harm than good, despite our intentions. He gestured to the tactical display showing the disabled Corexian fleet. But we never stopped monitoring threats that could affect galactic stability. We established the Emergency Response Protocol for use in extinction-level events. Your activation of that protocol was the first in 78 years. Valera's mind reeled with this new understanding of humanity. Not a species that had withdrawn out of fear or isolation, but one that had recognized its own destabilizing potential and chosen to step back, watching from the shadows, intervening only when absolutely necessary. What happens now? She asked. We'll help you rebuild, Chen said simply. The Terran Council has authorized full support for Arcadian reconstruction. We'll also establish a permanent monitoring station in your system to deter any future Corexian attempts. And what do you want in return? Korov asked suspiciously. Chen looked genuinely surprised by the question. Nothing, Weapons Master. The protocol exists to prevent extinction events, not to create obligations. The delegation arrived an hour later. 5 humans, each radiating the same calm competence as Admiral Chen. They'd brought detailed plans for rebuilding the Arcadian fleet, technology to detect and counter any remaining Corexian forces, and medical aid for the wounded. As Valera showed the human delegation through the battle-scarred corridors of Sanctuary Station, she found herself walking alongside a human woman who had introduced herself as Dr. Eliza Reyes, xenobiologist. I have to ask, Valera said quietly, why did you respond to our call? After centuries of isolation, why risk your people for ours? Dr. Reyes considered the question carefully. Humanity learned long ago that we're at our best when defending others. When we focus on expansion or domination, our worst traits emerge. But when we protect, she gestured to a group of Arcadian children being treated by human medics, we remember who we want to be. She smiled, a warm expression that softened her alien features. We isolated ourselves not to abandon the galaxy, Commander Thex, but to protect it, sometimes from external threats, sometimes from ourselves. The emergency protocol lets us fulfill our protective instincts without risking the complications that come with full diplomatic integration. Valera thought about the devastating efficiency with which the humans had dismantled the Coraxian threat, a threat that had brought her civilization to the brink of extinction. She thought about the centuries they had spent watching from the shadows, intervening only when necessary. I think I understand, she said finally. Your species doesn't want to rule. You want to guard. Dr. Reyes nodded, pleased by Valera's insight. Precisely. Earth may be isolated, but humanity has never abandoned its commitment to life in this galaxy. We just found a way to help that causes the least disruption. As they walked together through the station, Valera felt a profound mixture of gratitude and awe. The Arcadian Confederation would survive thanks to these enigmatic beings who had answered their desperate call. And in doing so, they had taught her people something vital. Sometimes the most powerful guardians are the ones you never see until the moment they're needed most. Later, as the human vessels prepared to depart, leaving behind only a small contingent to assist with reconstruction, Admiral Chen transmitted one final message. The Coraxians will not return to Arcadian space. We'll make certain of that. If you need us again, you know how to call. Until then, rebuild, thrive, and remember, you're not alone in this galaxy. As Valera watched the sleek human ships disappear into the darkness of space, she felt a renewed sense of hope, not just for her people's survival, but for a universe that contained such unlikely guardians, waiting silently among the stars. In the centuries that followed, the Arcadian Confederation would tell the story of how, on the brink of defeat, they made one last call to a human, and everything changed.